On a Wednesday morning with a thunderstorm threat, I'm meteorologist Rod Hill with Chris McGinness joining you live on our KGW Plus streaming channel. Happy you can be with us. This is a classic case of a day that people that don't keep updated on what the forecast is could be out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon going, it's sunny and 70s, and then the next thing you know, they're in the middle of a storm.
Yes. Yeah. It's gorgeous out there right now, although we can start to see some of the telltale signs of the atmosphere becoming a little more unstable with the alto cumulus clouds starting to fill in a little bit, and we'll get into that, of course. But the big deal is, go ahead. Yeah,
so we start off with the storm engine, if you will, big low offshore, and there's a front out ahead of this that's going to be coming in around the midnight hour tonight. And I think once that front actually passes, that will end the threat of significant storms, but rain shower activity will continue overnight. So what I was talking about, what could possibly go wrong? What a beautiful morning, right? We're at 64 degrees. The record high for PDX today is 73. I think we'll break it. Yesterday, if you haven't heard, we went to 80 degrees. It's important to note that because it is, in fact, this warm air mass that in many ways is setting the table for the risk of not only thunderstorms, but the risk of severe thunderstorms coming in later this afternoon and this evening. So our KGW weather impact alert, which we use to grab your attention that something is happening that will impact you potentially, starts at 3 o'clock this afternoon and runs all the way to midnight. This is the stretch of potential thunderstorm activity. And we are talking about, of course, thunder and lightning. Also, the threat that some of these individual cells could produce some little mini windstorms of gusty winds that would be erratic in nature between 50 and 60 miles per hour. Hail and even just the heavy downpours themselves could be an issue because, as we'll show you in a moment, some of these storms could be most intense potentially right around 5 o'clock when a lot of people are hitting the roadways trying to make their way back home. And as always, if you hear thunder, you see lightning, it's best to take shelter. We are looking at temperatures warming up today, 68 degrees at noon, into the 70s, and then there's that thunderstorm threat with the KGW weather impact alert up at 5 o'clock. And I do want to show you just a touch of the Futurecast data before we get to Chris with a further breakdown on the severe thunderstorm risk. This is for this afternoon. Now we're starting, and this timing has been really consistent on the modeling. The yellow is the heavier rain shower starting to develop between Eugene and Salem. Notice everything's moving from south to north up through the area. Here are the orange, and there's even some red in this cell just south of Longview moving out of Clark County at 5 o'clock. So at the very least, these would be heavy rain showers with a likely chance that there will be some embedded lightning at this time, and some of these storms could rapidly get pretty big. Notice how this explodes the storms as they move northward. This is 6 o'clock tonight. New storms coming up from the south. There's one just north of Eugene. Here are the storms moving up through Longview. The storm threat area, which Chris is going to show you in a moment, actually extends all the way up into Seattle. I know, Chris, we're throwing around the terms that some of these storms could be severe, and you're going to take our viewers through what that exactly means.
Yeah, so real quick, and these are not terms that we use very often here in the Pacific Northwest because, let's face it, severe weather is not something we deal with on a day-to-day basis or even season by season, right? So just to set the perspective here, this is kind of a rare event of maybe a once or twice a year type of thing. So the definition, the Weather Service defines a severe wind gust as anything 58 miles an hour or greater. Hail size, well, we frequently get small hail, pea-sized hail. The type of hail that would be qualified as severe is 1 inch in diameter or greater. Now imagine that. You're out there driving and suddenly you get 1 inch diameter size hail, or maybe 1 1/4, 1 3/4. That now you're starting to get into the golf ball size hail, which we don't necessarily see that. But the point is that hail, chunks of ice 1 inch in diameter falling from the sky, is considered severe, and obviously it can do some damage to property, damage to your car, and certainly not something that you want to encounter if you're out walking around. And any sign of tornadic development would be considered a severe thunderstorm, right? And in that case, if we saw one indicated on radar, the Weather Service would likely go ahead and issue a tornado warning. All right, let me go ahead and put this into motion here real quick. This is the outlook from the Storm Prediction Center in Oklahoma, and you'll notice that, as Rod said, all of Oregon is under some risk of thunderstorm, the green area being marginal, but this yellow area is basically the I-5 corridor west of the Cascades and along and east of the Coast Range from Seattle down to Eugene for the slight chance of severe weather. Now, you say slight and you're probably thinking, okay, well, why is that a big deal? all the parameters that would produce severe weather are coming into agreement that there is at least the potential that somewhere within this yellow shading, which includes our major population centers, Portland, Vancouver, Salem, et cetera, up and down the I-5 corridor, have at least a slight risk of seeing either damaging straight line winds, hail 1 inch in diameter or greater, or potentially even a tornado. So let me break that down a little more specifically. I apologize for the banner up here. I did not take the legend out, but this brown area basically shows a 5% risk for tornadic thunderstorms from basically Olympia down through Portland and down into Lane County. So that includes the I-5 corridor. And again, that's the tornado risk, right? It's small, but it exists. Okay, the next risk then, as we zoom in, there's that 5%, I should say. There we go. All right, the next risk is for damaging wind gusts, right? We're talking a larger area, which is, and what that 5% means is that anywhere within a 25-mile radius of one specific point here has a 5% chance of seeing severe wind gusts. Again, wind gusts in excess of 58 miles an hour. Now we go to hail, and this hatched area represents a greater than 15% chance of seeing hail to 1 inch in diameter or greater in the thunderstorms that pop this afternoon. Once again, we're including the Seattle metro area, Olympia, Portland, Vancouver, Salem, and Eugene. So we've identified the parameters and we've identified the area of interest. Really, anywhere in the state sees the potential for thunderstorms, which can produce lightning, which of course is deadly in and of itself. But then we start fine-tuning and looking at the individual aspects of these thunderstorms, be it tornadic, hail, or gusty winds, and we fine-tune that and we trim back the area of greatest concern. But it does line up, Rod, with the I-5 corridor, again, from Olympia down through Portland, Vancouver, and then down into the Eugene area. And I know you're going to have a look at Futurecast, which will kind of walk us through hour by hour exactly when we expect to see that storm threat at its greatest.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And you touched on this as well. Don't get overly hung up on the verbiage, a 5% chance of this, a 15% chance of that. The reality is we don't have these chances that often, period. And, 5%, and Chris touched on this, can often mean there's going to be hail, large hail somewhere. It may only cover 5% of an area. Well, if that's over your house, that's a big deal, right? So be prepared. Again, this is Futurecast. We'll show you what we showed you in a moment ago. This is 5 o'clock. Again, the storms are moving south to north up through our area, especially the red areas. Typically, is the model showing a projected high return to the radar site. That often means the radar itself is pinging off of ice pellets, not raindrops, larger objects. So you get those strong returns. And those storms could also, not necessarily, but also be one of the higher risk areas for some thunderstorm activity. And again, this still shows everything continuing through the 11 o'clock hour. I do want to show you the wider Futurecast for those of you watching us out across eastern Oregon. This does pick up a storm chance, but it's far more spotty in nature. And by spotty, there's one lone cell south of Pendleton at 5 o'clock, another one developing north of Burns. And there's some question, are we going to have kind of uniform action between, say, the Coast Range over the valley and into the Cascades, or are we going to see a lot more action near I-5 and then running up the west slopes of the Cascades? I don't have the answer for that, how even Steven it's going to be, or if it turns out to be a bigger threat on the west side versus the east side. But there does appear to be a storm threat along the coast as well. And what I find interesting about this, not necessarily the numbers. I mean, you're looking at this, you're going, well, Portland could have 34/100 of an inch between now and 11 p.m. tonight, and Salem could have the same. But realize, this is not a solid rain band coming through the area with a cold front, where we all get 0.3 of an inch of rain over, I don't know, a 6-hour period. This is showing individual storm cells, and the fact that it's showing uniform precip from Eugene all the way up into Kelso tells you that the model thinks that these showers and thunderstorms, while scattered, will be quite numerous and generally cover more area than not. And also realize that 34/100 of an inch of rain could come in a matter of minutes, not hours. In fact, there seems to be enough moisture in the atmosphere that this could be one of those days where we start getting reports later this evening of folks picking up a 1/2 of an inch of rain, 3/4 of an inch of rain, or even an inch of rain coming down in a period under an hour. That type of thing really can mess with traffic and quickly cause ponding on area roadways. And Chris, go ahead and kind of or chime in here. This is the Futurecast wind model. This is showing surface wind gusts. And again, the arrows, for example, this is at 4 o'clock, shows an east wind coming out of the gorge, shows south winds running up the coast, shows a southwest wind running up the valley. And it does show, at least in sporadic areas, some noticeably gusty winds. But one thing Chris talked about was there is at least a tornadic threat. There is at least a high wind threat. And when you get into that, Chris, as a forecaster, and please interject your thoughts, you start looking for things that could cause rotation. One of those is either a speed shear, which means you've got on one plane, you've got winds going this fast, and then right next to it, winds are only going like that. That causes friction. Or if you've got winds coming at different directions, that can cause friction and rotation as well, sir.
And you get that directional, quote unquote, directional wind shear stacked through layers of the atmosphere. So this is showing us what the wind is going to be like at the surface, but as we go through height, that wind will change direction, right? And it's that changing, that backing or veering of the wind with elevation that creates the rotation, right? So that's one of the key elements to not only just producing tornadic thunderstorms, but long-lived supercell thunderstorms, which, yeah, that's a term we don't mention a lot here west of the Cascades, is supercell thunderstorms. But while the name sounds scary, it's kind of the granddaddy of them all. It sounds like the granddaddy of them all, of the thunderstorms. They are the classic type of Midwest storm that may produce a tornado. Now, I'm not saying that risk is like, off the charts high, but for us, what we've been mentioning is it is not often at all that you see parameters suggesting that that's even in the cards, and there is at least some possibility to see those rotating updrafts, rotating thunderstorms, which leads to the threat of larger than the typical pea-sized hail, wind gusts in excess of 58 miles an hour, and of course the possibility of an isolated tornado.
There is a slight upper trough coming through, a slight one, Chris. I looked at on the GFS computer models at about 5 p.m. this afternoon. But in terms of the tornadic threat itself, it got me thinking, and tell me if your memory is different from mine. My memory tells me that maybe not all of them, but the high majority of storms we've gotten have actually been in much colder weather patterns produced by what was going on aloft. This is clearly a much warmer pattern without an absolute bullseye upper level disturbance, or vortmax we would call it, working through the area.
Yes to your first point. A lot of the, let's call them typical Pacific Northwest spin-up tornadoes, we'll call them, EF0s, EF1s, not terribly strong, but enough to do damage, right?
Winds that could be around 100 miles, up to 100 miles per hour, 80 to 100.
Right. When you start talking about rotating updrafts, rotating thunderstorms, now you're getting into storms that have the capability to be even stronger. And this is the type of air mass that is more conducive to those types of thunderstorms than the typical spin-up cold weather funnels that we see. So the point is that the weather parameters, so we're kind of talking about like a Midwestern or southeast weather setup, in that we've got cold air coming in, warm air already present, and by warm I mean temperatures today, if the sun hangs on long enough, could very well be 80 degrees. Yeah, that's warm.
Yeah, same air mass we had yesterday.
And the other thing that you look at when it comes to tornado development is what is the dew point and the relative humidity in the lowest layers of the atmosphere. Now, it's not overly high. It never does get overly high here.
In the 50s, it's high for us.
But it is high for us. So all of those things lead to, hey, that is a possibility. And so kind of circling back to the beginning part of your question is, yes, this is an atypical weather pattern. This is more of something like a situation that you would see east of the Rockies. And I will hand it back over to you.
No, that's all very, very good insight. And I think the one thing I noticed, and what you've actually been telling us in your story, is that a lot of these indices that we look at and parameters to determine, is there a severe storm threat, be it hail, be it wind, be it a tornado, we never see those numbers go out of sight, but we're at least registering in most of those categories as a possibility, even if it's low, and we don't often register in the possibility range at all.
And if you really want, we're kind of coming up to an end here. If you really want to geek out on what all that terminology is, by the way, the Weather Service has a great resource. A shout out to them and the hardworking folks at the National Weather Service that go out and save lives daily. If you read their forecast discussion, they will outline CAPE, helicity, and updraft speeds, and so that's really, we don't have time to get into all of that now, but if you are interested in that, that is a very cool thing to kind of do a little bit more of a dive into.
It's not interesting just to look at the temperatures at 5 o'clock. So what this, Chris mentioned, the air mass is still really warm. This shows the Dow's 79. So that's the weather model saying they haven't had any rain yet. Hood River is really warm. Portland 66, maybe just starting to get rain cool, but look at Salem.
Yeah.
Big time rain cool. So you could literally be outside in 77, nearing 80 at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then bam, all of a sudden you're in the 50s.
And note that Corvallis, meanwhile, is also a 66. So that indicates that this is not necessarily a one line of storms moving through. They could be scattered. You know, one part of a county gets hammered with a thunderstorm while the other part is still sunny, and you can see those towering cumulus clouds off in the distance, but you're not impacted by it.
So we're going to wrap it up, but a reminder, our timeline for the KGW Weather Impact Alert starts as early as 3 o'clock. That's the time we want you to realize what's going on around me and turn and look to the south, because that's the direction these storms will be coming from. And then we're in that storm threat. It could be not one way, but several, with the alert all the way up until midnight tonight. And then we're back into the cooler 50s starting tomorrow.
And one other point, the longer it stays sunny, and the warmer the temperatures get, the greater the fuel is, so to speak, to get these thunderstorms really popping. And especially if they're only isolated and we get very warm, that would increase the likelihood that the storms that do pop are quite strong to severe. So again, keep it tuned here. We will keep you updated.
All right, we thank you for watching us and using Chris, myself, and our chief meteorologist, Matt Safino, as one of your trusted weather sources. For now, I'm Rod Hill, wishing you a good day.